When you can't stop thinking about someone, but you don't know why. You weren't thinking about them yesterday. You didn't talk. No messages. No memories. Nothing triggered it. But suddenly, they're all over your mind. In your heart. In your du'a. Even in your dreams. And the scariest part? You don't even know what it is. Is it love? Is it desire? Is it regret? Or is it something more, a sign from Allah? It's confusing, right? You open your phone, and there they are. A random reel. An old message. A memory you weren't trying to remember. You close it, but the feeling doesn't leave. And suddenly, the thoughts start creeping in. Did Allah bring them back into my thoughts for a reason? Is this a test? A sign? Or am I just overthinking? No one really talks about this part. When someone keeps showing up in your life, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and no matter how hard you try, you can't explain it. You can't control it. It's like their presence lingers, silently, waiting. But for what? That's where most of us slip. We either chase the feeling blindly, or we shut it down completely. We either obsess over emotions that were never stable, or we ignore what might have been an answer to a du'a we forgot we made. But here's the truth most people won't tell you. Just because someone is constantly in your thoughts doesn't mean it's love. And just because thinking about them hurts doesn't mean they're meant for you. Sometimes it's something deeper. Sometimes it's Allah, not calling you to them, but calling you back to yourself. This isn't about romance. It's about clarity. Because your heart can deceive you, but Allah never will. So if you're stuck in this cycle, thinking about someone who's not even in your life anymore, someone you don't talk to, don't see, barely even know now, but they still show up, in your mind, in your emotions, in your worship, ask yourself this: why are they so present in your thoughts, but absent from your life? Because sometimes it's not divine. It's just loneliness wearing the disguise of hope. And yes, sometimes Allah does bring them to your mind, but not for the reason you think. Not for reunion, but refinement. To show you what you're still holding on to reveal the part of your heart that still needs healing. The Prophet Muhammad said, "The heart of the son of Adam changes more often than a pot of boiling water." So remember, not every thought is a sign. Some are just passing clouds, storms that teach but don't stay. But if every time they come to mind, your iman drops, your habits break, and your du'a turns into desperation, that's not love. That's a warning. Because anything that pulls you away from Allah was never sent by Him. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're just learning how to tell the difference between what Allah planted in your heart and what your own emotional hunger clung to. When love becomes a fantasy and a test, it takes time to see it clearly, to realize when love isn't love anymore, but a fitna dressed as a feeling. You don't love them now. You love the idea of them, the version your mind created, the late-night talks that never happened, the healing you hoped they'd bring, the version that would guide you closer to Allah, even though, in reality, they never once asked about your iman. That's the trap no one talks about. When love shifts from real to ideal, when you start holding onto a fantasy of who they could have been, instead of accepting who they actually were, or worse, who they never were. And the dangerous part? Fantasies don't need permission. They don't check in with reality. They build entire futures in your mind. From one kind word, one glance, one moment that meant more to you than it ever did to them. Before you know it, you're emotionally invested in someone who might not even think of you anymore. That's how love turns into a fitna. Not something that softens your heart toward Allah, but something that hardens it against qadar. You start resenting your unanswered du'as. You question why Allah hasn't made it easy. You blame destiny for not fulfilling the fantasy your mind promised. And what do we do when the fantasy starts slipping? We feed it. We stalk silently. We replay old conversations like sacred texts. We look for signs, even though Allah already closed the door. Let's be honest. Deep down, we're not asking for clarity. We're asking for a shortcut, to make the dream come true. The Prophet Muhammad said, "The eyes commit adultery, and the adultery of the eyes is the lustful look." But what is fantasy, if not the adultery of the heart? When your heart gives itself away, without nikah, without commitment, without reality, you're not just breaking inside, you're distancing yourself from the one who actually writes your love story. You can't find peace in a story you're forcing to happen. Maybe that's why you're so tired. Not because love is haram, but because your version of it has become a distraction from the one who created it. So ask yourself, if this person never becomes yours, can you still make peace with the author of your story? Here's a heavier truth. Sometimes you're not missing them. You're missing you, the version of yourself that existed with them. We think we miss a person, but sometimes it's how we felt around them. How our duās came alive when hope still breathed. How their presence, even just imagined, made our struggles feel lighter. You're not obsessed with their face. You're attached to the version of yourself that felt safe, seen, or understood. When they were part of your story, even if only in your mind. And when that feeling fades, when the person disappears or the story ends, you don't just mourn them, you mourn yourself, the you that believed love was finally close. That's why the mind replays old memories. Why it daydreams reunion scenes that never happen. Why it stalks in silence. Not to hold on to them, but to reclaim the parts of you that got left behind along the way. You know how it starts? One memory becomes a loop. One du'a becomes a playlist. One thought becomes a pattern. And suddenly you're asking Allah for signs, while ignoring the signs already inside you. The fatigue, the distraction, the constant inner voice, reminding you you're no longer fully present, even around people who truly love you. Here's something raw. Sometimes the person you're thinking about has already moved on. Sometimes they were never yours to begin with, and what you're calling a sign is just your pain, echoing back to you as hope. Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, "But perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you. And Allah knows, while you know not." 2:216. That verse doesn't strike hardest when you're calm. It hits when you're clinging, when you're begging for something you don't realize might be keeping you from peace. When the thought of them won't leave you, you think they'll complete you. But maybe, just maybe, Allah is holding something better behind the curtain you can't see yet. You can't move forward until you realize this truth. You don't need closure from a person when it was Allah who closed that chapter. What if it's not a sign? What if it's a test? You keep replaying their name in your head, like it must mean something. You start connecting invisible dots. Maybe the way they looked at me meant something. Maybe that dream wasn't random. Maybe Allah is showing me they're the one. But what if that thought wasn't a sign? What if it was a trap? Because the nafs doesn't always tempt you with the obvious haram. Sometimes it dresses desire in the clothes of destiny. And that's when it becomes dangerous. Now, every distraction feels divine. Every attachment feels meant to be. And no one around you can correct you, because in your mind, this isn't just love anymore, this is qadar. But pause. Really ask yourself, if this were a sign from Allah, why is it pulling you away from Him? Why are your prayers weaker? Why does your heart feel heavier? Why do you feel more obsessed, but less spiritually grounded? Sometimes, Allah tests you by letting someone occupy your heart, in a way only He should. And it feels spiritual, but it's not submission. It's you rewriting the meaning of tawakkul, just to keep your attachment alive. And here's the hardest truth. Not every beautiful feeling is from Allah. We don't like to admit that, because admitting it means accepting that we might be in love with a delusion, not a person. So ask yourself again, maybe this isn't guidance. Maybe this is a test to see whether you'll follow your feelings or your faith. When a thought won't leave you, it's not always a sign to chase it. Sometimes it's a du'a, being answered in a way you didn't expect. Think back, there was probably a night you forgot about. One of those late ones, when your pillow was soaked in tears, and your voice was barely a whisper, and you said, "Ya Allah, if they're meant for me, bring them close, and if not, take the thought away." But the thought didn't leave, and now months later, you're wondering, is this obsession, or is my du'a coming full circle? Here's what most people forget. Not every answered du'a brings immediate peace. Some come with confusion. Some come with discomfort, because you didn't just ask for them, you asked for truth. And truth doesn't always arrive in soft packaging. Maybe the constant thoughts aren't here to confirm this is love. Maybe they're here to confront what you still need to heal. Sometimes Allah keeps someone on your mind, not to bring them into your life, but to bring something out of your soul, to expose your wounds, to show you where you place your worth, to remind you what you think you can't live without, and prove to you that you actually can. Maybe the reason they're still on your heart is because the version of you that made that du'a still hasn't made peace with the version of you that had hope. So no, not every thought is a sign to chase them. Sometimes it's a signal from Allah to come back to yourself. You asked for a sign, but maybe the silence was the sign. Maybe the distance was protection. Maybe the only time your heart feels at peace is when you're remembering Allah, not when you're imagining them. And instead of letting go, you held on tighter, not to them, but to the version of you that still wanted it to work. Here's the part we don't like to say out loud. We're not really asking Allah for guidance. We're asking Him to approve a story we already wrote in our heads. We don't want the truth. We want the yes. But Allah loves you too much to say yes to something that would destroy your peace later. That person you can't stop thinking about, they might not have been a soulmate. They might have been a test, a mirror, a trigger for a du'a you didn't even realize you made. And if being attached to them is pulling you away from Allah, even slowly, even silently, then ask yourself, what exactly are you holding on to? Because no one sent by Allah will ever require you to lose your connection with Him just to keep them. So if your heart is aching right now, feel it, but don't run back. Don't shrink into old patterns and call it destiny. Let this be your turning point, not your spiral. And if you're still unsure, make this du'a tonight before you sleep. Ya Allah, if this person is good for my deen, my heart, and my akira, bring them closer to me in a way that brings me closer to you. And if they are not, then remove them gently and heal the part of me that still wanted them anyway. If this cracked something open inside you, leave that du'a in the comments, not just for yourself, but for someone else who's stuck right now too. Ya Allah, remove what's not written for me. You never know whose healing might begin, because you chose to share yours. And if you need more reminders like this, the kind that feel like heart surgery, not just lectures, stay close. We're not done healing yet.